Right now, it's really important, perhaps more important than ever, that our political leaders don't lie to us. But exactly what is a lie? How does lying differ from merely misleading somebody? Is it ever morally okay to lie to somebody? And is there an important moral distinction between lying and merely misleading? Okay, let's find out. Welcome back to the attic. On this channel, we're talking about metaphysics, language, logic, the mind, social issues. This is part 2 of a 2-part series on lying. In part 1, we looked at just what's required for someone to lie. In this part, we're going to focus on the moral dimension of lying. Is it always wrong to lie? Or are there some cases where it's ethically permissible? And we're going to focus in on what is the ethical difference, if any, between lying on the one hand and merely misleading somebody on the other. Throughout this video, I'm going to be focusing in on Jennifer Soul's book, Lying, Misleading, and What Is Said. There's a link down in the description. Is it ever okay to lie to somebody? Does it depend? Is there a moral distinction between lying and merely misleading? Is misleading better than straightforward lying? So here is an example that seems to suggest that misleading is kind of better than an outright lie. So you're visiting an elderly relative on her deathbed. She asks about her son. Is he healthy? Now, he was healthy up until yesterday, but he just had a car crash and died. What do you say to the old lady? It seems it would be kind not to tell her about her son's death. That would be really distressing for her. So you could lie and say, yep, he's fine, even though he's definitely not. Or you could be a bit tricky and say, well, I saw him yesterday and he was fine. Conveying that he's fine without actually lying about it. A lot of people think that the second option is morally better than the first because it's doing the kind thing without actually telling a falsehood. Okay, but there is something puzzling going on here. Why would a mere misleading statement be morally better than an outright lie? In both cases, I'm trying to get somebody to believe something that's false. I'm trying to deceive in both cases. So why does it actually matter whether what I'm saying is literally true or false? Different philosophers take different routes on this. So the moral philosopher Alistair MacIntyre takes an idea from Kant when he says, "My duty is to assert only what is true, and the mistaken inferences which others may draw from what I say or what I do are not my responsibility, but theirs." So the idea is this: if I lie, I am putting a falsehood out there. That is my fault. It's morally impermissible. I shouldn't do that. My duty is not to lie. Whereas if I say something true but misleading and you infer something false from that, that's your fault, not mine. I don't have a duty to kind of make sure that you don't make any false inferences. So there's the moral difference according to this MacIntyre-Kant line. Now, Jenny Soul questions whether that really works. Because in both cases, I am trying my best to get you to believe something false. So to say, oh, you know, it wasn't my fault that you made that false inference from the misleading thing I said, you know, nothing to do with me. I mean, that doesn't seem right at all, because it was something to do with me. I was trying to get you to believe something false, and you did. That seems to be my fault, just as in the case of lying. And I think I agree with Jenny Soul here. Here's a different take on why lying is worse than mere misleading. Comes from the philosopher Roderick Chisholm. His idea is that it's to do with trust, okay? Your audience should trust what you're saying, and if you lie, you violate that trust in a way that misleading them doesn't. But again, Jenny Soul questions that, because if you trust somebody and they mislead you, you kind of have violated that trust, just as you would have done if you're lying. In her book, Jenny Soul gives you some examples where it looks like misleading somebody is just as bad as the corresponding lie. These are meant to be counterexamples to the claim that it's always worse to lie than merely to mislead. So here's a nice example she discusses. You've got this guy George and he's trying to kill this person Freda. Freda is allergic to peanuts, so what George does is he cooks her a dinner and he puts peanut oil in it. Freda asks, are there any peanuts in this dinner? Now George can do one of two things here. He can say, there's no peanuts in it, which is true but misleading, or he can say, nope, this is safe for you to eat, which is a lie. Both of those things are misleading. Both of them are going to get Freda to eat the dinner and die. It doesn't seem that the true but misleading, there are no peanuts here, is better than the false, this is safe to eat. And I agree with Sol here. In this case at least, the true but misleading thing, there's no peanuts, is just as bad morally as the false, this is safe for you to eat. So clearly this one case doesn't show that there's never any difference between lying and merely misleading. What it's trying to do is it's trying to show that it's not always worse to lie than to mislead. And Sol's trying to use this to establish that really there is no important moral distinction between lying and misleading. They are both problematic. Something feels a bit wrong there to me because we do all seem to have this intuition that if you really have to mislead somebody, it's better to do it without lying. You just merely mislead them. Sol's answer to this is, it's not because the misleading was better than the lying, but it's because misleading rather than lying tells you something about the person's character. Given that we all tend to think, mistakenly according to Sol, that lying is worse than merely misleading, we would judge a liar as morally worse than a misleader. And you might judge yourself to be like that, okay? So you might say to yourself, wrongly according to Sol, okay, if I lie here, that is a bad thing to do, so I will merely mislead that person. So you are acting in what you take to be a more virtuous way if you merely mislead rather than outright lying. Even though the fact of the matter, according to Sol, is that the lying and the misleading are morally on a par. So according to her, even though there's no moral distinction between lying and misleading, there might be a way of evaluating speakers as being more morally virtuous if they try to mislead as opposed to outright lying. Okay, that's a really interesting line. I'm not sure I agree with it. But one thing's for sure, this area is really, really complicated. So coming up with a better theory, that's not going to be easy. Okay, that is the end of part 2 of this 2-part series on lying. I hope it's been interesting to you. If you've enjoyed these issues, consider subscribing. If you have feedback on any of the topics we've discussed, leave me a comment below. It would be great to hear from you. Thank you so much for listening this far. I really appreciate it. It would be great to see you back here in the future.